works. It seems to be great. Well, lovely to see you again, Sarah. And thank you so much for your latest book, A Contemplative Christianity for Our Time.
There it is.
There it is.
In full glory.
And thank you for making time to talk to me about it.
Oh, it's lovely to have a chance to talk with you, Roland, and chat about it.
Thank you. One of the wonders of our technology.
Indeed.
In the preface, you say that there was a time in your spiritual journey when you struggled to sustain any sense of faith. And I wondered if, first of all, you could first say a little bit about your spiritual journey and perhaps begin by talking about the struggles you've had with faith.
Yeah, and I think I may have done this before with you once, Roland, but yeah, I mean, I guess the idea of faith and was something I was always drawn to. I didn't grow up in a strongly religious family, but my mum took us to church, and I was immediately drawn to it. And I guess had that sense of yearning for the depth dimension of life, and felt that there was something here. But I also struggled to feel like I was on the inside of it. So there was a sense in which I was trying really hard to believe what I thought I was supposed to believe, and that would somehow make a difference. But I couldn't get on the inside of it. So I guess that's how I would characterize my struggle with faith. The struggle to make it living as opposed to just some stuff that you said.
Mm. So what changed?
Well, I'm conscious there's also a lawnmower outside my window, so I hope that's not too distracting.
Only a very slight noise.
Okay, that's good. Well, I guess really what changed was contemplative practice, being introduced to that. So I guess in my attempt to try to get myself faith, I'd gone off to study theology, and that's when I went to Oxford and I studied theology. And one of my teachers was Rowan Williams, who I saw immediately that there was something going on with him that felt qualitatively different to what I'd experienced in other teachers and in churches generally. But I still didn't feel as if I could get a living access to that for myself. And so I left the church, having studied theology, and thought that I wouldn't go back. But then I guess partly what happened was life crisis, and the sense of encountering some struggle and difficulty that took me out of my head and forced me into my heart and into a broken heart, and that kind of vulnerable space that I'd avoided all this time. And then in that process, learning about a practice of contemplation, first through the Buddhists, Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron. And it was through that practice of kind of silent meditation where it gave me a way of actually dwelling with my own vulnerability in a very new way. And then as that happened, sometimes words of scripture would come back to me, and I'd have the thought, oh, I wonder if that means that, or I wonder if that's what that's trying to get at. So it was a bit as though the contemplative practice began to open up some of the meaning of the tradition from the inside, as opposed to me with my rational intelligence trying to make sense of it from the outside. And I would say that was in a sense the beginning of my sense that there was something here but that the way to access it wasn't through my critical intelligence in the first instance, but through this well, the heart, I guess. Yeah.
When did you first encounter Christian meditation?
That would have probably been a few years after I first encountered the Buddhist teaching. So I had been practicing a little like that through that reading for a few years, intermittently, not particularly rigorous practice, but intermittently. And as I said, that was what began to open my sense of there being that Christianity could actually possibly be a way, whereas I'd written it off before then. So then I gradually was tentatively exploring coming back to church, and I went to church, and gradually and was struck in a sense by the mystery of it more than frustrated by it as I had been in the past. So that went on for a couple of years. I was still meditating with the breath, but I was starting to attend church again. And I guess what gradually was starting to grow was a desire to integrate my understanding of the particular faith tradition of Christianity with an understanding of the practice of meditation. And then a friend mentioned to me that Rowan Williams had been giving the John Mayne seminar in Sydney at that was in 2001. That was being played on Radio National. And I looked that up, and that led me to the World Community. And I was really excited about that. Not because I thought that the Buddhist meditation wasn't a legitimate way at all, but I did see that there was I could potentially integrate this practice into my kind of re-entry into the Christian tradition. And what was really important for me in that was that the World Community in no way set itself up in competition with other traditions. I loved the way it honoured the integrity of other traditions and was in friendship rather than in competition. So that was what enabled me to trust the World Community, and then through that, in a sense, come to an understanding of the practice.
So the tradition has been revived in recent decades by John Mayne, who really started the World Community for Christian Meditation, and his successor, Lawrence Freeman, and also Thomas Keating and the Centering Prayer Movement.
Yes.
I wondered if you could perhaps say a little bit about what they teach as meditative practice, maybe the basics of it, and what they understand meditation to be in Christian terms.
Both strands of that.
Yeah.
Well, I think in Christian terms they share a theological understanding of it, which is that meditation is a way of prayer. It's an embodied practice for doing what Jesus teaches us to do, which is to leave self behind, and leave self behind not in a not in the sense of self-repression or suppression or flagellation, which I think is what many people, including me, who've kind of grown up in the Christian tradition, understood by that. We understood it was about, kind of suppressing the self. A much richer understanding is about, in a sense, handing over the whole of the self trustingly to God. And how do you actually do that? How do you practice that? Well, you hand over your own thoughts, your agenda, your plans, anxieties, and ultimately John Mayne says your self-consciousness itself, the thought of the I. You let go all of that by letting go your thoughts and and repeating a single word, the mantra. So I think theologically speaking, the understanding of what's happening in this prayer is that we are handing ourselves over wholly, daily, and what we're handing ourselves into is the presence and the love of God, and that this is what begins to transform us. And both centering prayer that is taught by Thomas Keating and those who followed him, and Christian meditation as taught by John Main and Lawrence Freeman and the World Community, both use a mantra as a method for doing this, giving our attention to one word so that the many words can be let go. They do have a slightly different emphasis on how to use the mantra. So John Main teaching is that you say the word continually from the beginning to the end of the meditation, and that gradually the word will lead you into complete silence, but you don't choose when that happens. You say the word kind of humbly, unself-consciously, and the moment of contemplation, which is the moment of complete silence, is a gift. My understanding of the centering prayer method is a bit more you use the mantra to enter into that kenotic space, that space where you're handing over the self. It's then okay to stop saying the mantra and to dwell in that space of being handed over. But when you realize that you've begun to think, or you're becoming distracted or inattentive, you use the word again to bring you back into that space. So they're very similar, and they're not in competition, but they do have this different emphasis.
Thank you. You say that John Main believed that in meditation we verify the truths of faith in our own experience. This was very important for him, that we had the experience ourselves. So does your meditation verify the truths of faith for you?
It does, but I think part of what happens is that your understanding of what it would look like to have them verified itself begins to change. So at the beginning, and I guess when I described struggling in faith, what I was looking for was some kind of, well, what I thought I was looking for was some kind of proof that would satisfy my skeptical, critical, analytic intellect. I was looking for something, certainty and a kind of a kind of knowing that I really had a handle on, okay, this is true, this is right. Whereas I think the kind of verification that we are actually given and that John Main talks about is itself a more subtle thing. So it's not like it's easier for me to say, oh yes, well, God is thus and so, or this is how it all works, or yeah, I've got a handle on the whole thing. It's more like the verification is a kind of is a trust which enables you to keep giving yourself to it in a way that feels trustworthy, and a trust, a sense that there's meaning in this, and that it is leading me to become truer and more connected to the real, but it still is also mysterious and a kind of beyond my grasp. But I am a theologian, so it doesn't mean just parking the intellect. The intellect still then, wants to explore and express and all of that, but it comes at it out of a much humbler place, I think, than I was looking for earlier.
What for you is so important about a distinctively Christian form of meditation, and what part do you see Christ playing in it? You acknowledge at some length in the book that there are many people who don't see the need for a faith tradition when they meditate. If you like, they're meditating in a secular form, or they're using mindfulness as a form of meditation without any explicit connection with faith. So what's important for you about this distinctively Christian notion of meditation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do. That's the heart of the question, really, in terms of the Christian meditation tradition, I think. And it's one I've struggled with. As you heard, I came into meditation not because I met Jesus and Jesus told me to meditate. I came into meditation out of this other direction. And in a sense, as I say in the book, the kind of the question of Jesus has been a question for me in the life of faith. It hasn't, so to speak, come naturally to me. And even now, it's hard. I find it hard to just give some cut and dried answer to that question. But I guess the best I can express it is two things. I think one of the things that one of the understandings that Christian meditation has is the sense that we are giving ourselves to God. We are encountering something as we yield ourselves, as we come to that place of poverty. And so there is that sense that we are met, that in Christian meditation, it's not just that I'm letting go my thoughts and doing nothing else. I'm letting go my thoughts, and I'm thereby enabled to receive what is being given all the time, is coming towards me. And I guess that's the understanding of revelation, that actually underneath it all is a love which is self-giving and is giving itself to us. So, and I guess the more I've gone on, the more it's felt to me that is connected to Jesus. And the more I find myself, I guess I could say, loving Jesus. And I guess in the past, I always felt a bit embarrassed by that language, because it seemed, well, I don't know, it seemed a bit make-believe, or it seemed in danger of being sentimental, or, so it's barely at the level of articulation, but there is a sense of meeting a love and of loving that love back, and that is Christ. It's the best I can do, Roland.
Well, no, thank you. It's very clear. Thank you. You say that at the heart of the vocation of a Christian contemplative is the offering of a gift to the world. And you've obviously, in what you've said already, you've implied what that gift is. And as I say that, I'm conscious, deeply conscious as you are, that we're living in a time of great crisis. Dark forces are at work in the world. I don't think that's overstating it. And you touch on some of this in the book. Our civil discourse is deeply polarized and fragmented. And there's wide and deep social and economic inequality. And climate change poses such a grave existential threat that it's by no means certain that the human race and many other species will survive.
Mm.
So, bearing that in mind, how do you see this as a gift to the world?
Mm. Well, I think my response to that isn't original at all, but people quote, apparently Einstein said that, a problem is never going to be solved by the level of consciousness at which the problem arose, words to that effect. And I do deeply sense that all the issues that you just raised, that we were so conscious of, are not just, problems that can be fixed within a certain way of seeing ourselves and seeing the world and seeing social life and running societies, but they are issues that arise from a fundamental misalignment in those things, in the way we see ourselves, the way we see each other, the way we see our place in the world. Even how we think of what's admirable about human beings is a bit distorted in our culture, or sometimes a lot distorted. And it seems to me as though all of those things are symptoms of our, in a sense, having got to the end game of a way of being and seeing the world, being in and seeing the world. And that way of being in and seeing the world has generated certain benefits. It has made certain kinds of progress. So we don't have to discount that, but we're also reaching not only the limits of what they can bring us, but also really discovering the cost of that. And so what's being called for, and this isn't original to me, but is a kind of a paradigm shift in that. And I guess it seems to me that part of what that is going to require of us is a certain kind of letting go our investment in certain ways of understanding our identity and what progress is and all of those kinds of things, and touching into, as a lived experience, the possibility, the deeper truth of human life, which is that we are being given out of this other source, out of this other kind of dimension. And I think we need to know that, we need to start to know that as individuals, but we also need to know that at a certain critical mass at the level of community. And I guess that's what I sense the gift is of this tradition, this practice, communities of practice, which is that we're no longer seduced. We can see through the illusion that has structured so much of our way of life. We yearn for a truer and a truer and more faithful responsivity to the way things are. And and our lives depend on it.
Mm, mm. You quote the philosopher Charles Taylor in the book, who talks about what constitutes a real crisis for Christianity, and he describes that as self-sufficing humanism.
Mm.
So it's not so much secularism as this self-sufficing humanism. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, so I think how I understand that phrase, and I think Rowan Willis has words to this effect. The difference, I guess, between the kind of someone who is seeking to live a life of faith and the self-sufficing humanist is that the self-sufficing humanism terminates in the self. So it can have very, wonderful values and wonderful commitments and all the stuff that actually I would I would probably agree with. And in terms of what you think, how it matters to live, how to be a decent human being, we would be very, very closely aligned. But there's this question about what your life opens into. Does it open into this kind of infinite mystery, or John Main talks about the ever-expanding, an ever-expanding universe, ever-expanding love, or does it sort of terminate in the projects of the self? And does it leave open space for grace, really, for grace, for possibility that is beyond us simply to engineer or plan for? So I guess those would be the ones that'd be the kind of difference I would think of.
Thank you. There's another aspect of the crisis for Christianity, you also touch on, and because you say that many Christians feel there is a missing link in their churches. I wondered if you could say something about what that is and why you founded Benedictus Contemplative Church in Canberra.
Hmm. Well, I think the missing link is, in a sense, to do with where we started, which is this capacity to get on the inside of the life of faith, or on the inside of the mystery, or to have a living faith, as opposed to, I guess my experience was, and this is a child's experience, and obviously other people mature in different ways, but that experience that Christianity is about being a good person, doing, living a good life of service and all of that. And yes, you say certain things about God. We have a style of worship, but there's a sense in which that can be a kind of superstructure, like what's really driving the bus here. And I think lots of people yearn for that lived sense, and feel inadequate, like feel, so-and-so seems to really have faith, but I'm just kind of being a good person, or I'm trying hard, but I'm not quite getting it, or whatever. And I think because there's been a tendency in the way the faith is taught to focus on what we believe, what we think we need to say and think about God, as opposed to practices which enable us to be opened to the reality of it, actually practice letting go self at that radical level, as opposed to just trying to be a good person, because we haven't offered that to people. I'm generalizing too much, but that's the missing link for me. And that's why I think often there's a kind of, people can sense a kind of fear in Christianity, that the whole point is just to keep yourself together, keep your life together, and not have it be too messy, and a kind of hypocrisy in the end, because it can be well-meaning hypocrisy, but it's a trying hard at something, as opposed to living out of the reality of something. And so I guess with Benedictus, and my access, I would say, to that kind of livingness has been through the practice of meditation or contemplative practice. I'm not saying it has to be that way. You know, other people enter into that through other practices and experiences. But since it had been significant for me, that was part of the reason for wanting to offer a worshipping community that had this practice of meditation at the heart of it, so that that when we gather, we did meditate as part of the church service. So we didn't just talk about transformation, and we didn't just talk about what we believed, but we actually spent some time laying aside all of those thoughts and words and simply opening ourselves to the encounter and trusting. I guess that's the thing. Quite a lot of worship can feel like we're desperately trying to manufacture something, trying to make something happen or make people have an experience. Whereas I think at the heart of contemplative practice is it's already there. This is the reality. All we need to do is to shut up and and kind of become more present to it.
Would you like to say any more about the aims of Benedictus Contemplative Church and perhaps some of its chief characteristics?
Well, I guess as I just said, the fundamental, the animating idea is that the life of faith, Christian life, is about transformation. It's about the transformation of our love and our way of seeing and being in the world, and that we need practices. So it's practice based. Meditation is the key practice, I guess, but we have other practices such as reflection, structured reflective practice groups to enable people to become more self-aware, grow in self-knowledge. We have spiritual practice group where people share other practices that they might be doing. So, and we also, as we were discerning, you know, the fundamental kind of commitments and orientation of Benedictus, we came up with 5 words, which we call the 5 marks of Benedictus, which are to characterize our way of being together, and I guess what we hope to make available in the world. And those marks are hospitality, silence, discernment, reconciliation, and adventure. People always like adventure.
What are some of the adventures then? Well, the whole thing sounds like an adventure, but
yeah, I think that's it really, and that's where that came from. Adventure, you know, it's the same root as the word for Advent, so that sense of something's coming towards you, something's arriving, and I guess the life of faith, it seems to me, is about being up for the adventure, being open to the Advent, you know, and then entrusting yourself as best you can discern. So this is why discernment is kind of possible, but as best you can discern to where it is that you're being led. So I think part of what the mark of adventure does is stop us from thinking we know what Benedictus is, we know what it means, we know what it's for, we know where we're going. Like, we don't know any of those things. We're embarked and seeking to, Thomas Merton's phrase, to live as listeners. And I think that is part of what makes it feel a very living thing. It's not a fixed entity, and who knows how long it will go for, or what it will become, or, like I said, what it means. In a way, that's this idea of the kenosis, the self-emptying, which is intrinsic to the practice of meditation, which we practice at a personal level, but I guess we seek to have that characterize our common life as well, and our ecclesiology, if you like. Our ecclesiology is kenotic, or at least it seeks to be. Of course, we, then get worried about things and try to make things happen, but we seek to be called back to that.
Yeah. And just finally, I meant to ask you earlier, just to clarify for people how you understand the term contemplation in relation to meditation. Some people use the terms interchangeably, and some people might be a bit confused about the two terms. Do you see them as synonymous, or is meditation within contemplation?
Yeah, I think fundamentally I see meditation as within contemplation, although I can sometimes use them interchangeably, so it's a bit confusing. Like, there's a kind of double usage, I guess. Sometimes if I say contemplative prayer, what I'm really talking about is meditation. But I do think, and this, I think Lawrence Freeman has said this, and I find it helpful. So the contemplation ultimately is the kind of space of kind of radical presence to the presence of God, and it's that space of availability and silence and mystery, and we can't manufacture getting ourselves there, or even if I don't even know if getting ourselves there is the right metaphor, having that unfold within and around us, or whatever, that the contemplative space is a given, and if we experience it, that too is given. But meditation is a practice that we can do, a method which disposes us for that gift and enables us, in a sense, to bear it, I think. Martin Laird says, the sailor, the skillful sailor doesn't make the wind blow to make the boat go, but the skillful sailor, you have to know how to do certain things in order to harness the wind when it does blow. And, meditation doesn't make contemplation happen, but it disposes us to be receptive. So, yeah, I think it is helpful to have a distinction between the two words, and sometimes I use them interchangeably.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's been most interesting, and thank you for making the time. And every blessing with your continued adventure at Benedictus.
Thanks, Roland. It's lovely to talk, and thanks for asking about the book.
Pleasure.